Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Obinna never imagined the weight of silence could throb louder than thunder, but that morning it did. The air in their apartment was still, as if the walls themselves were listening. He sat at the edge of their cream-colored bed, one foot tapping the parquet floor absently, while his mother's voice filled the receiver with soft concern. The early sun streamed through the blinds in golden slants, cutting across his face like blades of light, illuminating everything but the confusion settling behind his eyes. Promise, barefoot in a lilac robe, had passed him the phone with a tender smile moments earlier, before returning to the kitchen. She had peeled an orange slowly, her fingers stained with juice, humming softly like nothing in the world was out of place. But as his mother told him about a cousin's naming ceremony, a single tone pinged from Promise's phone on the bed beside him, sharp and careless like a knife dropped in silence. He glanced at it, not meaning to pry, just instinctively, but the screen lit up without resistance, revealing a message preview that changed the climate of his soul. Last time was wild. I still can't forget the way you moved. When can we meet again, baby? It was signed from a contact named Deji, Workshop. Obinna's eyes widened, not in fear, but in a betrayal that had no name yet. He tried to focus on what his mother was saying, but her voice had become a distant echo, like someone calling from inside a tunnel. His grip on the phone tightened. His chest grew heavy with the realization that sometimes the devil doesn't knock. He slides through the door you left open in trust. The day Obinna met Promise, he had thought his search was over. Not because she was the most beautiful woman in Glenrock, though she carried her beauty like a second skin, but because she had looked at him like she saw past the layers, past the job title, past the quiet demeanor, past the habitual lateness to church. She had smiled like she recognized his soul, and he had felt seen. Their courtship wasn't the whirlwind kind that ended up in stories. It was patient and quiet, the kind that grows under the shade of mutual respect and thoughtful silences. He loved her laughter. It wasn't loud or forceful, but light and melodic, like wind chimes on a breezy day. And when she lost her father to illness, he had stayed through the night cries, through the funeral planning, through the awkward silence that comes when grief steals someone's vocabulary. The bond that formed in that season made Obinna certain she was meant for him. When they married, he spared no expense, not because he needed the world to notice, but because love, to him, was not something you gave halfway. People whispered about the money he spent. Some praised, some mocked, but he had shrugged it off. After all, Proverbs 18 verse 22 says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." He believed he had found his favor, wrapped in Promise's calm presence. But favor doesn't cheat. Favor doesn't write those words to another man 2 weeks into holy matrimony. Obinna's hands felt cold, even as the room grew warmer with sunlight. Back in the kitchen, Promise was rinsing her hands, laughing softly at something she'd just read on her phone. Obinna had ended the call with his mother, but he sat motionless. His breath came shallow, and his thoughts circled like birds over a rotting carcass. Had it been going on before the wedding? Was this why she sometimes stared off during conversations? Why she often said she was too tired even on the days they hadn't touched? 100 memories replayed in quick succession, her unexplained frown during their honeymoon dinner, the way she shielded her phone when replying messages, her sudden interest in weekend visits to her aunt in Riverhall. The message wasn't just explicit, it was too familiar. It carried history. No man speaks that way unless he's been there before, more than once. Obinna's jaw clenched. A part of him wanted to march into that kitchen, throw the phone at her feet, and ask who Deji was. But another part of him, a larger, quieter part, sat still, calculating, unraveling, listening for more. That's what heartbreak does sometimes. It doesn't shout, it studies. Like Judas at the Last Supper, it lets you eat, lets you smile, then it kisses you on the cheek just before it delivers the betrayal. Obinna rose slowly from the bed, walked to the bathroom instead, turned on the tap, and splashed cold water on his face. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he didn't recognize the man who looked back. He looked older, hollow. The kind of man whose heart had just received a letter from hell. Later that evening, Obena sat alone on the small balcony that overlooked Glenrock's outer street. The street lamp across the road flickered faintly, fighting the dusk, much like he was fighting the questions buzzing in his head. He hadn't said a word to Promise about the message. Instead, he had smiled, made light conversation, and even asked about her day. She responded with ease, completely unaware that her world was balanced on a thread. Obena thought about calling his friend Raymond, someone who had known him since childhood. But what would he say? That after spending nearly 4 million naira on a wedding, his bride was already sharing her bed and her body with someone saved his workshop? That would be like scraping open a wound only to be laughed at. He remembered what his late father once said, sometimes shame binds louder than chains. The shame was sitting with him now, heavy and unrelenting. He picked up his Bible, not out of devotion, but desperation, and opened to Psalm 55, and his eyes landed on verse 12 through 14, "For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, but it was you, a man my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together, and walked to the house of God in the throng." The words pierced deeper than the message itself. Obena rested the Bible on his lap, face buried in his hands. Sometimes it's not the infidelity that breaks a man. It's the fact that it came from the one who stood beside him when he wasn't looking. The next morning came without fanfare. Glenrock's sky wore a dull gray coat, and the scent of early rain lingered like an unfinished sentence. Obena lay awake long before the alarm clock buzzed, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. Promise was still asleep beside him, her breathing soft and unhurried, her face curled inward in peaceful slumber. He watched her as if seeing her for the first time, her eyelashes like half-moons, her lips parted just slightly. The woman he once saw as a bomb now felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. He wanted to reach out and touch her, not with affection, but with questions. Questions that had rooted themselves so deeply into his chest that even breathing required negotiation. Instead, he turned away and sat at the edge of the bed. His eyes found her phone again, lying on the nightstand like a quiet criminal. He hadn't deleted the message. He needed it there, untouched, a frozen moment he could return to if his mind ever tried to downplay it. As he stood up to dress for work, a peculiar thought passed through his head. If a man sleeps beside a woman and still feels alone, has he truly known marriage or merely shared a mattress? The line clung to his spirit as he stepped into the bathroom. He stared into the mirror again, this time not looking for clarity, but confrontation. He reminded himself of what the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4 verses 8 to 9, "We are hard-pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed." Somehow, in that scripture, he found breath. Promise woke later that morning to the sound of boiling water and the muffled hum of a gospel track playing from Obena's Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen. It was rare for him to be home this late. He usually left before dawn cracked open. She walked into the kitchen, tying her wrapper more snugly, her steps cautious like someone approaching a sleeping dog. Obena was facing the window, stirring a cup of tea with a slow, circular rhythm that matched the pace of the song. "You're not going to work today?" she asked, voice laced with an innocence that almost convinced him. He turned to her, smile slight, voice calm, decided to work from home today. Too many reports to chase in traffic. She nodded, her eyes searching his for any signs of suspicion. But Obena had mastered the art of wearing a mask in 24 hours. He poured her a cup and handed it to her without a word. Their fingers brushed briefly, his cold, hers warm. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but hollow, like an abandoned well. She took a sip and asked if he was okay. "Just tired," he replied. Tired was easier to explain than broken. She went back to the room to dress up for a quick errand. As she walked away, Obina watched her like a detective watching a suspect. Nothing she did escaped him now. The way she pressed her phone close to her chest, the way she avoided eye contact when talking, the way she smiled just a little too brightly. Trust, once cracked, doesn't shatter in a scream. It crumbles in whispers, in glances, in the unspoken knowledge that something sacred has been touched by strange hands. By midday, Promise was gone, claiming to visit her cousin's salon in Cross Lane for a quick braid redo. Obina knew that salon. It was a small place tucked between a food mart and a dental clinic. He had driven her there before, once waited an hour in the car with fan air blowing in his face and gospel music playing on low volume. But today, he didn't wait. He tracked her phone through the shared app they'd set up after marriage, a gesture born from transparency, but now used for surveillance. The blue dot blinked not in Cross Lane, but near Midtown, an entirely different part of Glenrock. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up his car keys. 1,000 voices danced in his head, each one feeding him doubt, anger, and irrational courage. He reached Midtown in under 30 minutes. The road was familiar, lined with old colonial buildings and fruit stalls covered with tarpaulin. As he parked a little distance from the blinking dot, he saw Promise emerge from a white Corolla that wasn't hers. She was smiling, talking to the man behind the wheel, a figure partially hidden by the glare of the sun on the windshield. Then she leaned in. Not long, just enough to feel too long. Obina stayed hidden. He didn't need to go closer. He had seen enough to fill a grave with. He sat still in his car as the Corolla drove off and Promise entered a boutique. Tears didn't come, not immediately. They would arrive later, like guests who missed the wedding but came for the funeral. For now, he simply rested his head on the steering and whispered, "God, what do I do now?" Evening came like a thief, painting the city in shades of melancholy. Obina drove around Glenrock aimlessly for hours, past the university gates where he once picked Promise up with plantains in the back seat, past the bus stop where they once stood laughing under rain, with no umbrella, past the church where they exchanged vows while friends clapped and cameras blinked like lightning. Everything mocked him now. Memories had become weapons. He pulled over by the pier where old fishermen sat peeling catfish and smoking dried snails, their laughter a soundtrack of survival. He envied them. Their troubles seemed simpler. Somewhere in the distance, a child's voice sang a hymn, and it hit him with quiet force. The solid rock, the voice cried, all other ground is sinking sand. This time, Psalm 41 verse 9 stared him in the face like prophecy fulfilled. Even my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. Obina closed the book slowly. His jaw tightened. He wasn't sure yet whether he would stay or leave. He only knew one thing for certain. The version of him that walked into this marriage had died. Whatever happened next would not be decided by pain, but by clarity, and for the first time in days, he realized the difference. Pain screams, clarity whispers. Obina didn't return home until long after the sun had dissolved behind the rooftops, leaving Glenrock clothed in shadows. The streets were quieter now, with only a few night traders packing up their goods and streetlights flickering reluctantly into life. He drove into their compound with the same precision he always had, careful not to scratch the gate, not to alert the neighbors, not to attract attention. But something in him had shifted. There was a silence in his soul that was not peaceful. It was the kind that echoes after something inside has broken. As he stepped into the house, Promise looked up from the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, a bowl of EVA half finished on the stool before her. She smiled, but it was a small, uncertain smile, the kind that waits for a reaction before deciding whether to widen or disappear. "You came back late," she said, rising to take his bag like she usually did. He handed it over without a word, then walked past her into the bathroom, locking the door with a click that echoed louder than it should have. Inside, he leaned against the sink, exhaling slowly. The mirror offered him a tired face, unshaven and weary-eyed, the kind of face a man wears when he knows his home is no longer his sanctuary. In that quiet, he whispered a verse his mother had once taught him when life felt uncertain. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Exodus 14, verse 14. But peace wasn't something he could find yet. It was a bird that had flown far away, and Obinna didn't know if it would ever come back to perch on his window again. That night, sleep refused to come near. Obinna lay on the edge of the bed, as far from promise as the mattress would allow. She had tried once, twice, to draw near, to ask if something was wrong, to suggest that perhaps he needed to talk. But he had feigned sleep, his breath slow and steady, his back turned like a locked gate. Eventually, she too fell silent, curling into herself like a child unsure of warmth. Outside, rain began to fall lightly, tapping on the roof in slow rhythm, as though nature itself was mourning. Obinna's eyes stayed wide open, locked on the ceiling as thoughts wove themselves like spider webs across his mind. Every word he had heard her say in the past played back with new meaning. Every smile, every laugh, every excuse now wore different clothes. He wondered how many nights she had lain in this same bed with him while her heart drifted elsewhere, to Deji, to secrets, to shame. He felt like a man locked in a burning house with no doors and no screams. He wanted to talk to someone, his friend Charles perhaps, or even his pastor, but the fear of being pitied held his tongue in captivity. In the darkness, he began to question everything. Had he been too distant? Too busy? Had work blinded him to warning signs? But even those thoughts felt dishonest, like trying to blame the roof when the foundation itself had cracked. There is a saying that a snake does not just appear, it slithers from somewhere. But in this case, the snake had entered through a door he didn't know he left open. The next morning arrived with reluctant light. The apartment felt cold, not from the weather, but from the invisible wall between them. Promise moved through the rooms carefully, as though her footsteps might set off something buried. She avoided his eyes, and he didn't force contact either. It was the kind of silence that hummed with everything unsaid, the kind that suffocated rather than soothed. As he sat with his cup of tea, staring into nothing, Promise finally approached. She stood before him, wringing her fingers like cloth being drained of water. "Obinna," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "did I do something wrong?" The question dangled between them like a spider on a thin thread. He looked at her, really looked at the way her eyebrows pulled together in concern, at the nervous tap of her foot against the tiled floor. He could have exploded right then, thrown her phone on the table, read out Deji's message like scripture at a funeral. But instead, he said, "You tell me." That was all. Just that. Her eyes searched his face for clues, but he offered none. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Whatever she wanted to say died unspoken. She returned to the room slowly, her shoulders hunched, her figure retreating like a shadow at sunset. Obinna exhaled. Proverbs 20 verse 27 echoed in his chest, "The spirit of a man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all the inner depths of his heart." Something in him had been illuminated, and now he couldn't unsee what had been shown. The office offered no escape. Obinna sat behind his desk at Glenrock Municipal Engineers, staring at blueprints that made no sense to him. The lines danced on paper like mocking spirits, and nothing held meaning. His phone buzzed occasionally, emails, notifications, a missed call from Charles, but he ignored them all. Work had always been his anchor, the one place he felt in control. But today, he felt like a captain steering a sinking ship with a broken compass. During lunch, he stepped out into the parking lot and sat in his car, the air conditioner humming softly. He closed his eyes and allowed his thoughts to bleed. He remembered a day from childhood when he had watched his father rebuild their broken fence with his bare hands. The man had said, "If the wood breaks at the root, It's not repair, it's replacement. That line now felt prophetic. Was his marriage broken at the root? Was this something he could rebuild? Or was he just delaying the inevitable? As he sat there, a text came in from Promise. Just one line. Can we talk tonight? He stared at it, unmoved. Words, he thought, were cheap. She had said a million things in their 2-year courtship that now meant nothing, but still, he typed back, yes, because closure wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. And whatever the outcome, he needed to hear her truth, not to forgive her yet, not even to believe her, but to begin the journey of understanding what monster had taken up residence in his home, wearing the face of the woman he had sworn to love. The living room had never felt this unfamiliar to Obinna. Everything inside it, the throw pillows, the family portrait on the wall, the vase Promise insisted on placing in the center table, all remained in their usual positions, untouched, undisturbed. Yet nothing felt the same. A different kind of air filled the space that evening, thick with unsaid things, heavy like soaked laundry. Promise stood by the edge of the couch, fidgeting with her fingers. Her voice trembled before it even escaped her lips. "Obinna, I know you've been distant," she began slowly, like someone choosing her steps over broken glass. "I've noticed. I feel it." Her words felt like pebbles dropped into a well, disappearing into silence. Obinna sat still, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She went on, stumbling over the truth like a child learning to walk. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something difficult, but I want to start by saying I never planned to hurt you. I never imagined things would spiral like this." He leaned forward, his voice even but sharp. "Then explain, because you're saying many things without saying anything at all." She sighed, closed her eyes briefly, then met his gaze. "Deji, he's someone from my past. We were never officially together. He helped my family when Mama had that surgery. He paid for things we couldn't afford." Her voice broke and she swallowed. "It started as gratitude. Then it became something else. He made me feel indebted. He said I owed him more than thanks." I didn't have the courage to say no. I didn't even have the words. I thought it would end once I got married. I was wrong. Obinna didn't move, but his eyes darkened. So it wasn't love? It was payment. The question carried the sting of disbelief more than accusation. Promise hesitated. It was fear. He had messages, pictures, things I shared, things I regret. He said if I didn't see him, he would ruin me. He threatened to send them to you, to your office, to your mother. Her hands trembled. I was trying to keep the past from swallowing my present. Obinna felt a surge of emotion rise, but it wasn't the rage he expected, it was exhaustion. His mind began sifting through all the months of their courtship, all the dinners, the church services, the plans they made with laughter on their lips and secrets in her heart. The betrayal had taken a different shape now, not one of lust, but of entrapment. Still, his voice was stern. "And you chose to face it alone? To let him have access to you instead of speaking to me?" She nodded, tears lining her eyes. "I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see me that way. Weak. Dirty." Obinna stood, pacing slowly. "But he didn't. And you let him crawl into our marriage bed, even if only in conversation, even if only once after we were married. That once was enough to undo everything." She walked closer, her face stained with regret. "I understand if you hate me, but I never stopped loving you. I didn't know how to fight him without losing you." He turned to her with tired eyes. "Then you lost me by trying to protect me." There was no victory in his voice, just a dull ache of truth, sharp as broken glass under bare feet. The hours that followed were spent in pauses longer than words, breaths heavier than silence. Obinna sat back down, and for a while, The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Promise sat opposite him, wiping her face with a tissue that quickly became soggy. "Do you still see him?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Not since last week. That message, the one you saw, that was the last straw. I told him never to contact me again. I blocked his number, his social media, everything. I even deleted that entire email address I once used to send him things." Obinna stared at her, trying to determine whether the remorse in her eyes was genuine or rehearsed. "And if he resurfaces?" She straightened. "Then I'll go to the police. I'll expose him. I'm ready now. I'm not afraid anymore. I just want to make this right. With you. For us." He looked away, then back at her. "Why didn't you tell me about him before the wedding?" She bit her lip, then replied, "Because I wanted to start over. I thought marrying you would be like baptism, washing away the stains. But guilt doesn't vanish just because you've changed clothes." That line struck him deeper than any of her confessions. He stood up, picked up his Bible from the shelf, and opened it randomly, a habit his mother often called spiritual roulette. His eyes landed on Isaiah 1 verse 18. "Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool." He read it twice, then closed the Bible slowly. Forgiveness, he knew, was divine. But trust? That was a different sermon entirely. The night wore on, and the electricity flickered once before surrendering. The room sank into darkness, broken only by the moonlight streaming through the curtains. Obinna moved to the balcony, needing air that didn't smell of regret. Promise remained inside, curled up on the couch, her sobs now quieter, almost like prayers whispered to an unwilling God. He watched the street from above, the quiet sway of trees, the occasional bark of a distant dog, the soft chatter of a couple walking past, unaware of the storm above them. He lit a candle on the railing and watched its flame sway in the breeze. In that flicker, he saw the state of his marriage, fragile, flickering, vulnerable, yet still lit. He leaned on the railing and allowed his thoughts to wander. Could something broken be rebuilt? Could he unsee what he had seen? Could he love her without suspicion nesting in every kiss, every glance, every phone notification? The questions circled him like vultures. But he remembered what his pastor once said during premarital counseling. Marriage is not a garden of roses. It's a field where thorns and wheat grow together, and you must choose daily which one to harvest. Tonight, Obinna didn't harvest either. He stood there, watching the flame, waiting for morning, not ready to walk away, but not ready to walk back either. Somewhere inside him, a war was raging. And for now, all he could do was wait for the dust to settle. The morning after felt like walking through ash after a fire. Things were still standing, but nothing was untouched. Obinna woke up on the armchair in the living room, his neck aching, his body sore, but his mind still as restless as the night before. The sound of Promise preparing tea in the kitchen drifted through the air like a hesitant peace offering. She didn't say much as he walked in. She simply placed a cup on the table and returned to slicing bread. Her movements were slow, measured, almost penitential. Obinna stared at the tea for a while before finally speaking. "I want to meet him." The knife paused mid-slice. She turned around slowly, unsure if she heard him right. "Deji?" He nodded, his tone low but resolute. "Yes. I need to look into the face of the man who thought he could haunt my house and still walk freely." Promise blinked, then looked down, lips trembling slightly. I don't know where he is anymore. He blocked me back after I told him off. He got angry." Obinna wasn't moved. "Then find him. Or tell me enough, and I'll find him myself." She hesitated, then gave him a name, a full name, and the location of the mechanic workshop in Woodbridge where she had last seen him. Obinna took the details down like a soldier preparing for battle. He didn't tell her what he planned to do. He wasn't sure himself. But some wounds don't close until the source of the pain is confronted. And for the first time in weeks, he felt like a man reclaiming his voice. By noon, Obena was standing across the street from the workshop. The sun was high, painting everything in a harsh glare, but his eyes remained fixed on the entrance. The place wasn't large, just a shaded enclosure with 3 open bays and 2 rusting signboards. Mechanics bustled about, smeared in grease and sweat, but Obena waited for a face that matched the image he had pieced together from photos and his wife's trembling confessions. When Deji finally emerged, tall, dark, with a permanent smirk etched onto his face, Obena knew without doubt. There was something about the man's posture, his arrogant ease, that screamed familiarity with control. Obena crossed the road slowly, hands in his pockets, heart thumping but mind sharp. He introduced himself calmly, quietly, but with a tone that sliced through pleasantries. "I'm Promise's husband." Deji's smirk faltered. "Ah, okay," he said, feigning casualness. "And you came here for what exactly?" Obena didn't blink. "To tell you that your shadow has overstayed its welcome. And if you ever call, text, or look her way again, I'll drag your name through every court, every police post, every place that knows what blackmail means." Deji scoffed. "She didn't tell you everything, clearly." Obena stepped closer, voice a whisper now, yet more threatening than a shout. "And whatever sick leverage you think you have, try me. I'll take it all public. My shame isn't bigger than my peace." There was a pause, long, heavy. Deji laughed, shrugged, and turned back into the workshop. Obena didn't follow. He had come to draw a line, and he'd drawn it with fire. He drove back to Glenrock in silence, his fingers clenched on the wheel, a faint tremor running through his bones. Confronting Deji hadn't brought immediate peace, but it had done something else. It had given him clarity. For days, Obena had lived in a fog, unsure whether he was the victim, the fool, or the broken compass trying to find north. But now, he felt something stabilizing inside him, like a house finding its foundation again after an earthquake. When he walked through the door, Promise looked up from the rug where she was folding laundry, her eyes questioning. "I saw him," Obena said, voice flat. She stood, words failing her. "And?" He shrugged slightly. "And he knows." "That's all you need to know." She took a step toward him, but stopped herself. "Did he say anything?" Obena looked at her, and for the first time, the rage in his eyes was replaced by weariness. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I won't live in fear, not of him, not of your past. But I also won't pretend like things are fine when they aren't." Promise swallowed, nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "I want to make it right, Obena. I know I failed you. I know I broke something I may never fully fix. But please don't close the door yet." He looked at her for a long moment before replying, "I don't know what forgiveness looks like right now. But I haven't walked away. That should count for something." The words weren't warm, but they weren't final either. The days that followed moved like wounded soldiers, slow, limping, but progressing. Obena returned to work, this time with a more grounded spirit. He kept mostly to himself, but his focus began to sharpen again. He replied to emails, attended meetings, and even smiled once or twice at Charles, who noticed but didn't pry. At home, things were quieter, but the tension was no longer hostile. It was thoughtful, cautious, like 2 people learning how to speak a language they once assumed was native. Promise took on small acts of restitution. She packed his lunch without asking, left kind notes on his desk, cleaned out the back closet he'd been meaning to sort for months. They weren't grand gestures, but they were consistent. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching the news, Promise reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but neither did he hold on tightly. It was a truce, fragile but acknowledged. That night, while brushing his teeth, Obena caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. His face looked more rested, less burdened. He remembered Psalm 34, verse 18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Perhaps God wasn't absent, only quiet. And maybe, just maybe, broken things didn't always have to be discarded. Sometimes they could be reshaped into something different, less polished, more honest. The rain that fell that Sunday morning wasn't loud or violent. It was soft, persistent, like the kind that seems to soak into bones rather than clothes. Obena stood by the window of their bedroom, watching the gray clouds fold themselves over Glenrock's skyline. He had always liked the rain. It reminded him of cleansing, of second chances. But today, it reminded him of Promise's tears on the night she told the whole truth. No embellishments, no half-phrases or protective silences. Just truth laid bare, like a field after harvest, stripped, exposed, waiting. He had sat through it, listening with the stillness of a man holding a broken compass, but choosing not to discard it. She had told him how the relationship with Deji began, not with lust, but with loneliness, layered with need, guilt, and obligation. She had described it like being caught in a slow-moving current that seemed harmless at first until it swept her into deeper waters. And all the while, she had kept looking at him like a woman begging not just for mercy, but for memory, for the man he was before betrayal wore new clothes. Obena didn't interrupt, not once. He let her carry her cross with her own words. When she finished, he stood up, walked out to the hallway, and sat in silence for nearly an hour. Not in anger, not in confusion, but in surrender. Because some truths don't require answers, they require air. The church they attended that afternoon was different, smaller, tucked at the edge of River Hall, surrounded by tall neem trees and dusty roads. It wasn't their usual place of worship, but Obena had suggested it after seeing a flyer at his office. He said he wanted quiet, not a crowd. Something different. Promise agreed, though her steps were hesitant as they walked into the building. The pews were half filled. The walls bore the faded touch of old paint, and the pulpit was modest, a plain wooden stand draped with white linen. Yet there was a serenity in the air that couldn't be bought. The service was slow, uncluttered, the kind that didn't demand performance but presence. During worship, Obena stood still, his hands down, eyes closed, not seeking a sign, just stillness. The pastor's message that day wasn't grand or poetic. It was about broken vessels. God doesn't discard what's cracked, he said. He reshapes it, uses the brokenness for something new, something humbler, but more powerful. Obena felt something inside shift. Not a full healing, but a loosening of the tight fist around his chest. As they left the church, Promise reached for his hand. This time, he held it. Not tightly, not out of habit, but willingly, quietly. The walk to the car was short, but it felt longer because they were walking beside each other, not just next to each other. He didn't say much during the drive home, but when they got to the gate, he looked at her and said, "We're not what we were." But maybe that's not a curse. Maybe it's a beginning. That evening, Obena took out the wedding photo album he had once pushed to the bottom of their wardrobe. He flipped through it slowly, page by page, not rushing, not reliving, just observing. The pictures didn't sting like they used to. Instead, they felt like fragments from another life, one that still mattered, even if it had been interrupted. Promise sat beside him, watching his face more than the photos. "Do you regret marrying me?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost breathless. Obena didn't answer immediately. He closed the album, placed it back on the table, then leaned back on the couch. "I regret that I didn't know everything," he said slowly. "I regret that the man I thought I was, and the woman I thought you were, weren't entirely accurate. But marriage was never about perfection. It was about covenant. And the truth is, I meant every vow, even the ones I didn't understand fully when I said them." She began to cry again, not like before, but softer, tears of relief, not shame. He reached for her hand again. This time, they didn't let go. Later, as they prayed together, something they hadn't done in weeks, Obena opened his Bible and read aloud from Lamentations 3, verses 22 to 23. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. And with that, something unnamed settled between them. Not a perfect reconciliation, but a shared willingness to rebuild, brick by fragile brick. Days turned into weeks, and while everything didn't magically fix itself, the air in their home began to change. Laughter returned, slowly, like a guest unsure of its welcome. They started having dinner together again, not just sitting at the same table, but eating like people who wanted to be seen. Obena didn't ask for explanations every time her phone beeped. Promise no longer avoided his eyes when speaking. Instead, they both practiced what they called honest breathing, moments of silence that didn't carry fear, but calm. One evening, they sat under the mango tree in the backyard, something they hadn't done since their wedding night. Fireflies danced around them, and the scent of wet earth clung to the air. I still don't know what the future holds, Obena said, breaking the quiet, but I know I want to walk toward it with you. Just don't lie to me again. Ever. Promise nodded, voice steady. No more lies. No more running. Just truth, even when it's ugly. He smiled faintly. Especially when it's ugly. That's when it matters most. The night sky above them didn't clap or explode in stars, but the moment felt full, like a field finally yielding fruit after a hard season. It was not a fairy tale ending, but it was something better. It was real. And sometimes, that's the greatest miracle of all. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones that bleed. They're the ones that sit quietly in the soul, where no one sees but you feel every second. Betrayal and love, especially from someone you've trusted with your future, can feel like a storm that takes your roof and your rest. But hear this, pain doesn't have the final say unless you hand it the microphone. If you've been hurt like Obena, don't rush to act out of rage. Sit with your silence, listen to the truth, and move from clarity, not chaos. And if you're like Promise, burdened by mistakes, trapped in a past you never planned to bring into your present, know this: shame is loud, but redemption is louder. What matters most isn't perfection. It's the courage to confess, the strength to cut off what's killing your peace, and the humility to rebuild what was broken. Relationships require truth. Healing needs honesty. Love grows when both people agree not to pretend anymore. Don't be afraid to start again, not from scratch, but from experience. Guard your peace, protect your home, and never let temporary pleasures destroy permanent blessings. If love is still breathing between two people, no matter how faint, it can still be revived. You don't need to pretend you're fine. You just need to be willing to fight for real peace, not public appearances. We come before you with hearts that have seen storms, with minds that have wrestled with confusion, and with souls that are weary from carrying secrets, shame, or sorrow. But Lord, we thank you because even when our hearts break, yours remains whole, and you draw near to the brokenhearted. Lord, for anyone listening who has been betrayed, remind them that you are the God who sees in secret, the one who catches every unseen tear. Heal the silent pain, restore their confidence, give them the grace to walk with dignity, even when they feel undone. Remind them that their worth was never tied to someone else's loyalty. And for those who carry guilt, those who have made decisions they now regret, may your mercy meet them where they are. Wash them with your forgiveness. Teach them to speak truth and to fight for freedom, not just comfort. Let them no longer be slaves to fear or past mistakes. Release them from every grip of manipulation and every lie from the pit of hell. Father, for homes that are wounded, for marriages on the edge, for relationships built on shaky ground, breathe new life into them. Rebuild what the enemy tried to scatter. Give wisdom to the confused, peace to the restless, and strength to the weary. Show them that broken doesn't mean finished. You are the potter who reshapes clay. May the spirit of deception be uprooted. May the chains of secrecy be shattered. May the oil of restoration flow into every home listening right now. Help us all to love honestly, to forgive wisely, and to heal deeply. And if some doors must close, Lord, close them gently, but don't let us lose our faith. Help us to rise again, not bitter, but better. In Jesus' name we pray. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.